Welcome, I'm John Caldera, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. Later on, we're going to talk about saving the swamp. But first, an old friend of mine, used to work with him at the Daily Camera. Actually, I worked for him. Clay Evans, thanks for being here. Welcome back.
Thanks, John. Great to be on your show.
All right, I want to talk about this. Bones of my grandfather. Let's spend a little time. First of all, tell me who your grandfather was.
Yeah, this book is just out this week. After nearly a decade of work, my grandfather was First Lieutenant Alexander Bonnyman Jr., a Marine who was killed in the Battle of Taro. A lot of people have forgotten that battle, unfortunately. In 1943, posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor.
What is Taro?
What is Taro?
What is it? It's an island, but
well,
it's an atoll, isn't it?
It's an atoll, yes, and it is about 18 miles long. It is truly in the middle of nowhere. It's about halfway between Brisbane, Australia, and Honolulu, 1 degree off the equator, hot, and today crowded, very filthy. The little island where this battle took place, 6,000 dead, about 1,100 Americans, and about 5,000 Japanese forces in 76 hours, all on less than 1 square kilometer of sand. Unbelievable.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. He died. Was his body returned to the United States for burial? How did you know that he died? When you talk about bones, this is not artistic license. You're talking about bones.
Real bones, yes, sir. Well, you know, the truth is, my family desperately wanted his remains to come back. So this is my great-grandparents and his younger brother. And, you know, this book details the letter-writing campaign, all this stuff. And they just got really every runaround story in the book from Army Graves Registration, which was the agency that went back after the war to locate
Army Graves
Registration. Yep. They went back. They did find about half of the, about 500 that they were able to find, repatriate. The rest...
How soon after
1946 they began looking?
All right, so we're already having decomposing bodies, so they were bones at that point.
Yes, pretty much by that point.
All right,
and 4 years later, they said all the rest of them, we can't find them, but that's okay. They didn't have the technology that we have today. What bothers me is that they went and told all the families, including my families, they gave them 16 stories each. Oh, he was buried at sea. Oh, he's buried as an unknown in Hawaii. None of those stories were true. So actually, my family wasn't aware until 2009, thanks to this little nonprofit out of the Florida Keys, had stumbled upon this historic anomaly. And this guy, Mark Noah, and History Flight, his organization, started doing research, and I found out about it. And I started going to Taro in 2010. But the first time I went was not under the auspices of, but there's a $300 million a year government agency tasked with this. They're the only entity that can legally identify. So I went down very excited.
Help me out. You're going too fast for me. So there is a $300 million a year organization.
Yes.
Their task is to bring home, repatriate.
Correct.
The remains of fallen soldiers.
Yes.
From
foreign battlefields.
Foreign battlefields.
Yep.
Highly emotional. What's going on in Korea right now is part of that. $300 million a year to bring home the remains because we want to honor our dead. Did they know the bones were there?
They sort of knew. Over the years between 1950 and the early 2000s, periodically local islanders would find them. They dig trash pits or a garden, they find them, they'll turn them over and they'll wind up back. You know, there's probably a dozen, 15. So they were aware. Honestly, I just don't think they were very interested. This is a very difficult place to do archaeology. 25,000 of the poorest people on Earth crammed onto 1 square kilometer of sand. And it's hot, it stinks. I love the place, but it smells and lots of disease. They just were never very interested. And I saw that in 2010, the first time I went.
Did you went down as a reporter, or did you go searching for your grandfather's remains?
In theory, they might have discovered they had certain locations they were going to look. I was a family member. That's how I went. And I said, yeah, I might, research this and write a book. So I was a freelance reporter, yes.
All right. Tell me about the organization. So you've got a $300 million a year government organization. Don't worry, we're from the government. We're here to help. Versus a guy in a small not-for-profit. What is the not-for-profit?
Yeah, it's called History Flight, Inc. started by a guy named Mark Noah. He lives in the Florida Keys. He's a pilot, and originally what it was they had a bunch of World War II planes, and they would do rides for veterans and stuff. He stumbled across this while doing some recovery work for another organization in the lagoon off Tarawa. And when he found out, he was kind of outraged, went back, did a bunch of archival research, and he said, hey, wait a minute. There's probably hundreds of guys here. I'm going to see if I can't raise money and find them. And, you know, he played nice with the government agency for many years. They don't like anybody else to step on their toes and do this. So he did all the research. He raised his own money. He handed it all over for free. They weren't interested. So finally in 2013, Mark said, to heck with it. And he started his outlaw archaeology operation.
He went renegade.
He went renegade.
He became he became Indiana Jones.
He became, I say this book is part Flags of Our Father, part Unbroken, and part Indiana Jones.
Wow.
Yeah.
Does he have relatives on that island? This is just a passion play for him that he wanted to do.
Yep, and he didn't serve in the military. We do finally get a story, you know, into that at the very end of the book. He explains to me why he feels so deeply about this. He's had great success, and I've been down to that island 6 times, going back again in November, probably for the last time, 75th anniversary of this battle. But he's had unbelievable success. Now, we do all the work, we do all the research, we bring in the experts, we hire them, we do the digging, we do the recovery, we do the lab work, we do the reporting, the photography, and then, by law, we have to call up this agency in Hawaii and say, hey, come pick them up. And they'll do that. They come, and then they have to legally identify.
Help me understand. We do the research, we find the bodies, we dig them up, we clean them, how? I mean, I'm sorry, there's this tiny little island. You know there are remains somewhere on the island because the whole island was a battlefield.
Right.
How do you find them? And what research do you do to point you in the right direction?
Yeah. Oh, Mark's used everything. I mean, so archival research, we got what called casualty cards. They're sort of individual deceased personnel files. And by sort of a process of editing, he was able to figure out how many guys were probably still there. So we had some basic information. There are named and numbered cemeteries, which turned out to be bogus in a lot of cases. There were no bodies in a lot of those graves. But then there were
battlefield graves made.
Right. There were trenches dug by the Navy construction battalions after the fighting was over, after 3 days. Most of the guys had died early. They were in bad shape. They wrapped them in marine ponchos, put them in. They did their best to record where they were, but
they're fighting a war.
Yeah,
they got better things to do.
They had to rebuild the airfield. So they got lost, a lot of them. Right. And then after doing that archival and photographic research, Mark brought in ground penetrating radar using drones, GPS, a cadaver detection canine, absolutely everything, interviewing locals, which may be the best way to find out. And he just started, you start digging in likely places. In archaeology, it's not usually a spectator sport. If you miss by an inch, you've missed by 10,000 miles. Right. But man, when you hit it, it's exciting. I mean, every single day. When we found this trench where my grandfather was, it's known as Cemetery 27, it was the only one of the named or numbered cemeteries that there'd never been a trace of it ever found again. He found it, and his archaeologist, Kristen Baker, found it in the spring of 2015.
So, are they volunteers who come to do the archaeology? Are they paid archaeologists?
So we pay for top experts in archaeology, odontology, which is dental matching, surveying, engineer work, demolitions work, because there's unexploded ordnance. But there's tons and tons of volunteer hours put in, including by very high-profile, well-known archaeologists, because people want to be part of this. So $300 million a year. This agency proved not to be very interested. I'm guessing here, I'm ballparking, but Mark raised privately $6 to $8 million, and for that money to date, he has recovered probably 100.
All right, so $300 million a year.
And they have found one without our help.
One on this atoll.
Yeah. Remember, they're working the whole world, right? But
$300 million, one. $8 million, 100. All right,
that's right.
Talk to me about your grandfather, because I mean these are people we can't touch anymore,
right.
And you were able to touch them. There's photographs here of of the skeleton of your grandfather.
It was amazing. You know, his Medal of Honor hung on the wall in my mother's home, my whole life. So I've always admired him. But the truth is, just like his bones were lost, his story was kind of lost. He sort of got put behind glass. So this book is 2 excavations. One is telling the real, full human story of this man, complicated guy, one of the most courageous people I think probably ever, great leader, natural leader, and complicated, you know, other things. And then the other excavation is finding the actual remains. So
what was his job on the island when he was?
He was an engineer, so he was with an engineer battalion, and that they do all kinds of things. On Guadalcanal, he helped rebuild a bridge, but they do heavy weapons work. They do all kinds of stuff. He was sort of freelancing here. He wasn't even with his own unit when he put together this plan to assault a bunker that was holding up the Marine advance, put together the guys, and he led the way up the bunker and then single-handedly held off the counter-assault. And that is the specific action for which he received the Medal of Honor.
Held off how did he die? Do we know now?
Well, we do know now, and that's one of the most amazing things about having actually found the physical remains, because there's been a little bit of up and down. You know, it was long accepted. A book came out about 20 years ago that I got a chip in my shoulder about it, because it really kind of diminished what he did. But I got the goods. When we found his remains, we were able to definitively prove physical evidence that what that book said was simply not correct.
What did the book say, and what did you find out?
Well, this man, this historian, wrote a great book about the battle. Unfortunately, he decided to rely on the 50-year-old eyewitness testimony of one guy who was indeed up on that bunker with my grandfather. And he was simply wrong, and he reported, essentially what he reported was, had it gone the way he said, he should have received the Medal of Honor, not my grandfather. So he claimed to have been the one to have been there alone, and my grandfather joined him. He said they were lying down. He said my grandfather lifted up his head and was shot in the face, unrecognizable. And that's all I'm going to tell you. You guys read the book and you'll find out why we know that's not the case.
2 pictures in this book that really grab me. One is a close-up of your grandfather's skull. To see, it's not quite seeing his face, but it is seeing his face. The other one is of a classic Zippo lighter.
Mm-hmm.
You found something he touched and used daily, I bet, and you found, where is it? Yeah. What happened to it?
So I was
did you ever touch it again?
I was down in the hole that day. Mark Noah was not yet on the island. He was just coming down. Once he got there, he said sort of for professional reasons, he preferred that I, as a family member, did not participate in the recovery of my grandfather. He just wanted me to watch. I was shooting video for the organization anyway. But before he came, I was helping. And underneath what would have been his right hip, probably in a front pocket, was a lump of sand, coral sand encrusted, probably metal. Mark has a really a low-key hydrolyzation machine that he sets up in his hotel room, and it takes all the crud off. There was some kind of metal that was too badly damaged. We don't know what it was, possibly a St. Christopher's medal. We know my grandfather carried one. And there was this lighter. That thing, the wick is still in it, and he cleaned it up. I tried to light it thinking, hey, it might still work. What I ended up doing with that is giving that to, my mother has gotten all the attention as the oldest child for this. Her youngest sister didn't really know her father. She was 1 when he left for the Marine Corps. So her daughter's boyfriend made a little case, and I gave it to her to display in her home in Hawaii.
All right, real fast, we're out of time. Where are his remains today?
His remains are buried in Knoxville, Tennessee, next to the grandparents and brother especially, who worked so hard to bring him back home.
Incredible. What a story. And for illiterates like me, available on Audible as well. On
Audible, I recorded it. If my voice doesn't bug you, I will say I have one Colorado signing left at Old Firehouse Books in Fort Collins on the 25th, Wednesday the 25th of July.
And people go to which website?
Bonesofmygrandfather.com is my website for the book. You can find out a lot more information, see pictures, order the book there. It's available everywhere.
Great story. Stay tuned.